You ever notice how the longer someone spends alone, the more they settle into their own rhythm? It's like when you first start living on your own, and suddenly you realize that nobody's telling you when to wake up, when to eat, or how to organize your space. And at first it feels like freedom. It's exhilarating. But then over time, that freedom starts to turn into structure. A structure built entirely around what's comfortable for you. When a man has been single for a long time, he doesn't just live alone. He builds a world where everything revolves around him. His morning routine is exactly the way he likes it. His weekends, they're planned or not planned based on his mood, his energy, and what serves him best. And that sounds great, right? But here's the catch. When everything in life is optimized for you and you alone, making space for someone else starts to feel like a disruption rather than an addition. It's like this. Imagine you've got your favorite chair, the one that's perfectly molded to your body. It's worn in all the right places and it supports you exactly how you like it. Then one day someone suggests swapping it out for something new, something that might take a while to get used to, something that doesn't immediately feel as comfortable. The logical part of your brain might understand that change can be good, that the new chair might actually be better in the long run. But emotionally, you resist it. Because why would you change something that already works perfectly for you? That's what happens in relationships. When you're used to being alone, you develop habits, routines, and expectations that are built entirely around your own needs. You control your environment completely, and over time, you start to value that control more than you even realize. It's not just about what time you wake up or what you eat for dinner. It's how you handle stress, how you process emotions, how you deal with challenges. And when you're single for a long time, you develop a way of doing these things that works best for you. But relationships require adaptation. They require compromise. And compromise isn't just about giving something up, it's about making space for something new. And if you've been single long enough, that's where the challenge comes in. Because when you're used to doing things a certain way, when you've designed a life that fits you perfectly, you don't always see the need to make adjustments. Not because you don't care, not because you don't want love, but because you've created a version of your life that already feels complete. Here's what's really interesting. Most people don't even realize this is happening. A man who's been single for years doesn't wake up one morning and think, you know what, I'm too set in my ways to be in a relationship. No, it's more subtle than that. It shows up when he struggles to share his time, when the idea of adjusting his schedule for someone else feels like an inconvenience rather than an opportunity, when he finds himself getting frustrated over little things. Why is she putting the dishes in the wrong part of the sink? Why does she want to talk about feelings right before bed when he's already in shutdown mode? Why does he feel drained after spending too much time together even though he really likes her? These are all signs of a man who's been operating in his own world for so long that he's forgotten how to share it. And listen, I'm not saying being single is a bad thing, not at all. There's a lot of power in learning to be alone, in building a life that makes you happy without depending on someone else. But if you're not careful, that independence can turn into isolation. And the longer you go without having to consider someone else's needs, the harder it becomes to do so when the right person does come along. Now, does that mean a man who's been single for years is doomed? Of course not. But it does mean that if he wants a real, deep, fulfilling relationship, he has to recognize what's happening. He has to be aware of the patterns he's built. He has to ask himself, am I resisting love because I truly don't want it or because I don't want to change? Am I saying no to relationships because they don't fit or because I built a life so perfectly tailored to me that I've left no room for anyone else? Because here's the truth. Growth doesn't happen in comfort. And love isn't just about finding someone who fits into your world exactly as it is. It's about being willing to stretch, to evolve, to make space. And that's where the real challenge is for a man who's been alone for a long time, not in finding love, but in being ready for it when it arrives. So the question isn't just whether you're open to love. The real question is, are you willing to make space for it? When a man has been single for a long time, something fascinating happens. He doesn't just stay the same, he evolves. He shifts his focus inward. He starts pouring energy into himself in ways that might have been impossible if he had a relationship pulling his attention in different directions. And at first, this feels like an advantage. He's got all the time in the world to build himself, sharpen his skills, chase his ambitions, no distractions, no obligations, no compromises, just pure undivided focus on becoming the best version of himself. And that's powerful. Because when a man is alone, He has the space to think, to reflect, to dive deep into what he truly wants in life. He doesn't have to negotiate his dreams with someone else's. He doesn't have to balance his goals with the needs of a partner. Every ounce of his energy is his own, and when that energy is directed toward personal growth, he can create something extraordinary. Maybe he starts hitting the gym consistently, not for anyone else, but because he wants to see what his body is capable of. Maybe he doubles down on his career, pushing harder, rising faster, because there's nothing holding him back from working late or taking risks. Maybe he develops new skills, picks up new hobbies, explores parts of himself he never had the time or space to explore before. And slowly, he starts realizing that he is his greatest project, that every hour he invests in himself compounds, making him stronger, sharper, more capable. And this is where it gets interesting, because while all of that is incredible, it also comes with a cost. The deeper he dives into his own personal development, the more he starts to believe that he doesn't need anyone else. He tells himself he's happy, fulfilled, complete, and maybe he is. But maybe, just maybe, that belief is also a shield, a way to justify the fact that he's gotten so comfortable on his own that he's forgotten what it means to truly connect. See, personal growth is powerful, but it can also be a trap. A man who's been single for a long time and has invested heavily in himself can reach a point where he sees relationships as an interruption rather than an enhancement. He's built himself so well that he starts to feel like bringing someone else in would only slow him down. He's so used to making decisions for himself, about himself, that the idea of factoring in another person feels like a loss of freedom. And that's where the problem is, because yes, growth is important. Yes, leveling up your life, your body, your mind, that's crucial. But at some point, you have to ask yourself, what's the point of building all of this if you never share it with anyone? What's the point of reaching the top if there's no one there to celebrate with you? What's the point of creating a life that looks incredible on the outside if deep down there's still an empty space you're pretending doesn't exist? And here's the thing, he might not even realize that space is there, because when you've been single long enough, you get good at filling the silence. You get good at distracting yourself with new goals, new challenges, new accomplishments. You convince yourself that happiness is just on the other side of the next achievement. But fulfillment isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you share it with. That's why the most powerful, fulfilled men aren't just the ones who've mastered their craft or built their empire. They're the ones who have the courage to let someone in. Because relationships aren't just about companionship, they're about growth in a way that personal development alone can't give you. A man who's been single for a long time has mastered growth in isolation. He's learned how to push himself, challenge himself, hold himself accountable, but true transformation, that happens in relationships. That happens when you have to grow with someone, when you have to navigate conflict, when you have to stretch beyond your comfort zone, when you have to learn to love someone not just for who they are, but for who they're becoming. And allow yourself to be loved the same way, and that's the real test. Not just can you build yourself, but can you grow alongside someone else? Can you take everything you've learned, everything you've built, instead of protecting it, expand it? Because the truth is, if your personal growth has led you to a place where you can't make space for love, then maybe, just maybe, you haven't grown as much as you think. So the question isn't just whether you're improving. The real question is, are you growing in a way that leaves room for something greater? The longer a man goes without a relationship, the more he refines what he thinks he wants. He starts building this mental checklist, what he needs in a partner, what he won't tolerate, what kind of relationship would actually be worth his time. And in a way, that's a good thing. He gains clarity. He's no longer just chasing attraction or falling into relationships by accident. He knows himself better, he understands what makes him happy, and he's not willing to settle for anything less. But here's where it gets tricky, because as time passes, that clarity can turn into something else. That list of standards, of must-haves and deal breakers starts getting longer. He starts fine-tuning his preferences, filtering people out before they even get a chance. What starts as self-awareness can quietly turn into perfectionism, and before he knows it, he's not looking for love anymore, he's looking for an ideal. And the problem with ideals, they don't exist. See, when a man has been single for a long time, he hasn't just been waiting for the right person, he's been imagining them. He's been crafting this vision in his head of what the perfect partner would be like, how she'll talk, how she'll think, how she'll react to situations, how she'll fit into his world without disrupting it too much. And every time he meets someone new, consciously or unconsciously, he's measuring them against that vision. And if they don't fit, he moves on. He tells himself it's because he has standards, and maybe he does, but what he doesn't realize is that he's not rejecting women, he's rejecting reality. Because in his mind, a relationship should feel effortless. The right person should just click. There should be no friction, no adjustments, no growing pains. And that belief, more than anything, is what keeps him alone, because real relationships, they don't come pre-assembled. They're built. They're created over time. And they require something he might not have exercised in a long time, adaptability. When you've been alone for years, you don't have to adapt to anyone. You don't have to compromise on what movie to watch or what time to eat dinner or how to communicate when you're upset. You've designed your life around you, and everything in it is tailored to your comfort. And so when someone new comes along and suddenly there are differences, different opinions, different habits, different ways of thinking, he interprets that as incompatibility. When in reality, it's just normal. It's just what happens when two people come together with different life experiences. And if he's not careful, he'll spend years chasing something that doesn't exist. He'll keep telling himself that he just hasn't met the one yet. That if he just keeps working on himself, keeps improving, keeps waiting, eventually the right person will appear. Someone who won't challenge him too much, who won't require him to change, who will just fit seamlessly into his life. But that's not love. That's a fantasy. And the longer he holds on to it, the harder it becomes to recognize real love when it's right in front of him. Because real love isn't about finding someone who fits perfectly. It's about finding someone worth adjusting for. Someone who brings something new into his life, who challenges him in ways he didn't even know he needed, who forces him to grow in directions he never would have on his own. And that requires openness. It requires a willingness to embrace imperfection, to let go of the fantasy and make space for something real. So the question isn't just whether he has high standards. The real question is, has he made his standards so rigid that he's closed himself off to the very thing he's been waiting for? The longer a man stays single, the more his social skills evolve, but not always in the way he expects. Some men become sharper, more charismatic, more confident in conversations because they've spent years navigating social situations on their own. They've learned how to carry themselves, how to work a room, how to hold a conversation without relying on a partner to fill in the gaps. They've built an identity around independence, and that kind of self-assurance is magnetic. But for others, the opposite happens. The longer they're out of the game, the harder it becomes to step back in. Relationships, especially deep emotional ones, require a level of vulnerability that they haven't exercised in years. And when you stop practicing something, you lose touch with it. It starts to feel unnatural, foreign, even uncomfortable. It's like working out. If you stop lifting weights for years, your muscles don't just stay strong, they weaken. And when you try to jump back in at the same level you left off, you struggle, you feel the resistance, the strain. And if you're not careful, you convince yourself that maybe you were never really that strong to begin with. That's what happens socially when a man has been single for too long. He gets used to surface level interactions. He gets comfortable keeping things light, keeping things easy. Maybe he's great in casual conversations, great at making people laugh, great at handling himself in professional settings. But when it comes to intimacy, when it comes to truly connecting, opening up, sharing himself, he hesitates. Not because he doesn't want to, but because it's been so long since he's had to. And that hesitation, that's what keeps him stuck. Because relationships don't thrive on surface level charm. They require depth. They require connection. They require a level of honesty and openness that you can't fake no matter how socially skilled you are. And for a man who's been single for a long time, that can feel like a threat because vulnerability is unpredictable, it's messy, it doesn't follow a script. And when you've spent years controlling your environment, controlling your emotions, controlling how people see you, the idea of letting someone in, of exposing the parts of yourself you don't have all figured out, that's uncomfortable. It feels like risk. So what does he do? He avoids it. He keeps things at a distance. Maybe he dates casually, but the moment things start getting too real, too deep, he pulls back. He tells himself that he just hasn't found the right person, that the connection wasn't there. But the truth is, the connection was there, he just didn't know how to hold on to it. Because connection requires a skill he hasn't exercised in years. The skill of being seen. The skill of allowing someone to get close enough to see the flaws, the imperfections, the uncertainties. And when you've been alone for a long time, you start believing that keeping people at a distance is easier, safer. that if you don't let anyone in, you can't get hurt. But here's the paradox. Avoiding connection to protect yourself doesn't keep you safe. It keeps you stuck. It keeps you in a loop where you're constantly searching but never finding. Where you crave something deeper but you're afraid to reach for it. Where you tell yourself you want love, but every time it gets close, you convince yourself that now just isn't the right time. And if you don't recognize that pattern, if you don't break it, years will pass and you'll wake up one day realizing that you didn't avoid pain, you just avoided living. So the question isn't just whether you can talk to people, whether you can charm a room, whether you can hold a conversation. The real question is, are you still capable of letting someone in? The longer a man has been without a relationship, the more he learns to rely on himself. And that's not a bad thing. In fact, it's one of the greatest strengths a person can have. Being self-sufficient, knowing how to handle life without depending on someone else to complete them. He learns how to navigate his emotions on his own, how to solve his own problems, how to build a life that works for him. And at first, this feels like freedom. It feels like control. He doesn't have to explain himself to anyone. He doesn't have to check in, adjust his plans, or consider how someone else might feel about the decisions he makes. His emotions are his own, his time is his own, his energy is his own. And when he's been single long enough, he gets used to this independence. He gets comfortable in it, maybe too comfortable. Because here's what happens. When you don't have to be vulnerable, when you don't have to rely on anyone, you start to lose the ability to do so. Not because you're incapable of it, but because you stop trusting it. You start seeing emotional dependence as a weakness. You tell yourself that leaning on someone means giving up control. That asking for support means you're not strong enough to handle things on your own. And so little by little, you start shutting down. You start keeping your emotions to yourself, keeping your struggles to yourself, keeping your deepest thoughts locked away where no one can reach them, not because you don't want to share them, but because you don't see the point. You tell yourself, I've handled this much on my own. Why start relying on someone now? And that's where the real danger is. Because the longer you go without opening up, the harder it becomes. The longer you tell yourself that you don't need anyone, the more you start believing it. And when you finally do meet someone who genuinely cares, someone who wants to know what's going on inside, you struggle. Not because you don't want well, but because the idea of sharing yourself, of letting someone see the parts of you that aren't perfect, that aren't controlled, that aren't put together, that feels foreign, it feels unnecessary, maybe even uncomfortable. So you hold back. You keep things on the surface. You tell yourself that love is about compatibility, about shared interests, about finding someone who fits into your life. But deep down, the part of you that's been independent for so long is resisting, not because you don't care, but because you don't want to need. And here's what most men don't realize. Real relationships, deep relationships, aren't about needing someone. They're about allowing someone to matter. They're about choosing to let someone in, not because you can't survive without them, but because life is richer when you do. Strength isn't about never relying on anyone. Strength is about knowing that you could do it alone, but choosing not to, choosing to trust, to connect, to let someone share in your life even when it feels unfamiliar. And if a man has been alone long enough, if he's built his walls high enough, that's the real challenge, not finding love, but allowing himself to accept it when it comes. So the question isn't just whether you can handle life on your own. The real question is, are you willing to let someone share it with you? The longer a man has been without a relationship, the more he convinces himself that love is something that will happen later. Not now, not today, later. After he's built himself more, after he's made more money, traveled more, gained more experience, figured things out, he tells himself that when the time is right, when he meets the right person, then he'll be ready. Then he'll open up. Then he'll make space for a relationship. But here's the truth. Later's a lie. It's an illusion. It's the mind's way of avoiding discomfort, of postponing vulnerability, of staying in control. Because as long as love is something that happens in the future, he doesn't have to deal with it in the present. He doesn't have to risk rejection, doesn't have to step out of his comfort zone, doesn't have to face the parts of himself that might struggle in a relationship. And over time, that delay becomes a pattern, a habit. He keeps telling himself the same story, that there's still time, that he's not missing anything, that when the right woman comes along, everything will just click. But what he doesn't realize is that time doesn't wait. Life doesn't pause. And every moment spent waiting for love to magically appear is a moment lost. A moment he could have spent building something real, something deep, something meaningful. Because love isn't something that just happens. It's something that's created. It's something that requires effort, presence, and most of all, openness. And if a man spends years keeping love at a distance, convincing himself that he'll be ready someday, he runs the risk of never being ready at all, because there will always be a reason to wait. There will always be another goal, another challenge, another level of success to reach. But what happens when he finally gets there? When he has everything he thought he needed, the career, the fitness, the financial stability, but he looks around and realizes that he's built a life so independent, so self-sufficient, that there's no space left for someone else. That's the danger. Not that he won't find love, but that he'll become so used to not having it that he won't know how to embrace it when it comes. That he'll be so conditioned to living for himself, making decisions for himself, structuring his world around himself, that he'll see love as a disruption rather than an expansion. And if he's not careful, he'll wake up one day and realize that all those years of waiting, of delaying, of telling himself that love would come later, they weren't preparation, they were avoidance. And the worst part, you won't be able to get that time back. So the question isn't just whether he'll be ready someday. The real question is, will he be ready before it's too late?